Resilience, or the capacity to endure hardship, difficulty or suffering. Though we would like to generate this out of innate resources, invariably we find as a species, when we encounter difficulty or struggle, that there's an emptying out of how we felt, how we thought, about the direction we were travelling in at the time. Life meets us head on. Life comes at us through our senses. We see the world, we taste the world, we hear the world, and internally we feel the world, and we have thoughts about the world, and all of our inherent and given conditioning goes into what we do about that. We modulate outside conditions and circumstances in order to bring about emotional congruence, psychological resilience on the inside. And each of us desires at least to express life out of what we might call our best thinking, our best shot at it. And yet all of this comes with its attachment to the very opposite, the very absence of resilience, or a lack of resilience is perhaps a way of looking at an inability to deal with situations, the emotional incongruity, the mental limits of our own resources, and the tapes that we carry with us from our conditioning, from our schooling, from our parenting. When we are struck by life and we find the limits of our resources readily apparent, and we break down and fall into and bottom out of our tools, of the tools that we currently have, and we don't see how we can carry on. We give up. As has been well said, without hope, there is just the desire for hope. I've known experiences of that. Can you imagine that? Maybe many of you know that. What would it be like to be hopeful and to live out of an experience of that which seems unending? That's truly the absence of hope, when one can't even imagine an alternative to the present way, which is, of course, the very definition of being enslaved. And so resilience, perhaps if we could innately operate out of a resilient core, out of a strong sense of self, or a strong sense of everything which has gone and been given to us prior to the point where we're asked to be newly resilient. Perhaps there's death around us, perhaps there's illness around us, perhaps there's financial insecurity, perhaps there's a finality in some way to the situation of our life, or the situations of our lives, the components of our lives, that we were comfortable and safe and secure in it up until that point, or at least felt we were able to feel in control of, or even being okay being out of control. Yet we are struck once more by life and its inevitable and necessary suffering and difficulty. And then what do I do with it? How do I deal with this? Most of us will use our support networks. Most of us will use our inner sense, our inner compass, to navigate difficulty, even the most complex of situations. Survivors of internment camps during the Second World War, for example, I'm thinking of Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist who moved through Auschwitz and another internment camp, wrote extensively about his experience of seeing his tribe, his group, the prisoners, day after day, being resilient in the face of terrible circumstances, as some would go out to work and some wouldn't return from work. They'd be working in muddy and snowy fields with nothing on their feet. Just the most disgusting way in which humans can treat each other. And of course, really the largest harbinger of suffering is that which we do to each other, and perhaps worse than that, if we really reduce suffering down and difficulty and uncover the absence of resilience, the way in which we treat ourselves. and we all have the capacity to treat ourselves poorly, and in fact every act of treating each other poorly is really that which we are doing to ourselves, because that is a further introversion of the unfinished business and the brokenness with which we carry, and we're really just projecting it out into the lives of others. And in that, if we're truly blessed, there's an amends to be made on their part to restore that which we took from others. Is a true game of wisdom, yet to come to a place of awareness of how we need to forgive ourselves and others for that which has been done to us is a true act of openness and open-heartedness and wisdom. So if there is an innate resilience, perseverance, tenacity, the capacity to stare into the eyes of the dark night of the soul or of suffering and difficulty, then great. Then we would use that. We would all use that. We would all have that. Yet there's a learned resilience, of course. What is the fundamental way in which we learn resilience? Well, that is, of course, to, out of the very absence of the same, that we do encounter rock bottom in a direction of our life, in a pocket of our life, in our life per se. Perhaps we are informed that we have ill health, and perhaps there's mortality rates attached to that particular idea of ill health. Perhaps we've been told we have cancer or some kind of arterial complication. I smile because that's a situation I've been put in myself. Or perhaps we come to the end of a behavioural attachment, addiction, for example, an alcohol problem, an eating problem, a pornography problem, a codependent relationship type dynamic. And we bottom out. We finally come to a place which we thought we'd been in many times before. And the significant expression, and the significant place to arrive at, beyond, I hope today's the day when I hit rock bottom, is that inward realization, the inward recognition, the inward acknowledgement of emptiness, radical, brutal emptiness, where the thought that arises as a consideration from that rock bottom is framed in this simple idea: there has to be an alternative to the present way. There must be another way. That's very different from, I can't do this no more, I've had enough. They all propose in the I statement that precedes the sentence that I am trying to get something out of it. When we bottom out, when we hit the absence of resilience, we may have an innate resource, but when we come to a place where there has to be another way, there's no me in that. There is an openness and a willingness and the vision to see the very desperation and emptiness of our own independent resources, and a reaching out, a reaching into, is there some way or some notion or some expression or some pathway or some tribe or group or some openness to a bigger story, a larger picture? And can someone please help me? Because I can't do this on my own. There's a germinating there of a seed of what will later prove to be an open door to resilience, a door we've been banging on, a door which we must realise that we were inside of, trying to get into a place that we've already been in. That acknowledgement of our own absence of resources, because we're not doing life alone and we're not in this alone. An openness to otherness and an open-heartedness. Out of that we can build on esteemable movements, accessing ways in which we learn to develop self-worth, self-esteem, emotional availability to life thereafter. We move away from the absence of our own resources and emptiness of bottoming out, and we start to build on transformation that occurs out of the acknowledgement that we haven't got it all figured out and that we can't do this game called life alone. none of us can. There isn't a book for life, is there? And this often comes in midlife as well, of course. So the learned resilience of that is that we learn that we can persevere through difficult circumstances, that we can become survivors. Not a survivor, although this too, but I'm not talking about a survivor that has, really struggled. I have survived this thing and didn't I do well? A self-congratulatory survivor, but a survivor with a larger S, one that is an example of resilience, one that is an example of perseverance, one that has been through cycles and patterns of transformation and change that have seen the person actualize and come to wholeness and fruition and really living life with a capital L in all its fullness, where we're able to embody and know and experience emptiness when it comes along once more. And we know, having been through the pathway, through the badlands of transformation, through the difficulties, that we've looked into the eyes of suffering, that we've seen that the enemy is me. We have seen that we see that I have no other enemy than the ways in which I have introverted and been resistant to change. And we're able to go round those inevitable cycles of suffering and difficulty and persevere and endure, because we've been here before. I know the path. I know the undertaking. I know how to travel through this and navigate the terrain of emptiness, and know that the void that is fertile with meaning and transformation is rich in learning and ultimately in wisdom. And in that we come to the fullness of self, in which we are able to not only bear our own suffering, but we are, as is the very definition of the word kindness, able to bear the vulnerability of others. In that way, we're able to carry that message that one can overcome anything. And we forget this. This is why some of us don't make the race. It isn't really a race. It's a beautiful dance called life, and we are all dancers. More than that, we are the moves to the dance ourselves. And more than that, we are the dance. Dance well, my friend. The dance, as we improve at it, develops learned resilience that we can reconfigure into an innate capacity to be resilient in the face of the most abject difficulty. And of course, as we've said elsewhere, eventually we'll be faced with the reality of the limits of the body and of the mind, and we'll have to go through that blessed walls. We come to the end of the body-mind, and we leave that physical space to know whatever there is that might follow that. As much as we've speculated, we don't fully know. And to be able to draw from an innate sense of resilience as we leave the body-mind and as we leave this physical plane at least, then surely then we can acknowledge to ourselves that we have perhaps done life well. We have learned the most important lesson of life, which is how to die well. And that is a thing. Count on it. I am empty.